So today we're going to talk about 10 frightening serial killer movies that I recommend. And it might just be an unexpected list. So welcome to the Cobwebs channel, everybody. My name is Daniel. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. And let me just say resoundingly, this is not a top 10 list. This is not the best of all time. This is actually a genre that I'm typically not super passionate about, not the most knowledgeable in, but I've been doing some digging, checking some more out lately. So I want to talk to you about some favorites that I recently watched, as well as some previous favorites that I threw in here that I really just want to recommend. Not necessarily the biggest classics. So with all that said, let's jump in. Angst? Now let's go with Angst from 1983. It is about a recently released serial killer from prison who immediately tries to stalk down some new victims. He breaks into a house of an older mother, her handicapped son, and a pretty daughter, and decides to kill all of them. So this is an Austrian film that's actually based on a real serial killer in Austria, and it's one of those films that is infamous for how sick and disturbing it is. And it's exactly the kind of movie that I would typically just not watch. I am not the extreme horror guy. I don't think any of you guys subscribed, so I could tell you the sickest, most disturbing movies. That's just not what I love about the horror genre. That's not what I typically watch. But I decided to push myself to check this one out. It's one of the more disturbing classics, comes highly recommended, including from a friend of mine. And I gotta say, it's not as bad as I was expecting, and it is actually quite a good film. The thing that I think is the most disturbing about it is it really puts you in the perspective of the killer. The killer, who is only known by the name The Psychopath, is played by Erwin Leder. He's fantastic. This dude looks like a serial killer. I mean, look at him. No disrespect to the actor, but I think that's why he was cast. And he just feels so sick and twisted, and the movie has no actual dialogue. I didn't even realize that while I was watching it. I realized it after the fact. All the dialogue is his narration inside his head. So you are in the thick of his sick and twisted brain, watching him meticulously go through his process, which is a terrible process, by the way. One thing that's interesting about this is he is an absolutely terrible serial killer. He is so sloppy, and it feels realistic, you know, and totally unglamorized. We're not watching like this brilliant psychopath go through his methods, a Hannibal Lecter or something like that. No, he's an idiot. He's terrible at this. That makes it really, really interesting. It's got one kill that is extremely graphic and goes to places that most movies rightfully would not go. But if you're in the mood to push yourself as a horror fan into some more extreme territories, I think you could probably handle this one. And I do think it is very interesting as a character study. It is sufficiently intense, and it'll take you to those dark places you're wanting to go.
Even serial killers live next door to somebody.
Summer of '84 from 2018 is about a group of friends on summer break who begin to suspect that their police officer neighbor is secretly a serial killer currently at large. They spend their day spying on him, gathering evidence, but things get more and more dangerous. If you couldn't tell from the synopsis, this is very much a Fright Night riff, which is in and of itself a Rear Window riff, so it's a little bit of a copy of a copy, and it came out at the height of Stranger Things popularity, so it's very much nostalgia bait, 80s kids on bikes running around talking about Star Wars, Goonies, Monster Squad vibes everywhere. And I actually think it quite works as that. I don't think it goes too over the top on the nostalgia. It made me feel like I was in that time period, not just watching a copy of it. It doesn't go too far with references. Yes, kids talk about Return of the Jedi, but I think that's natural if it takes place in 1984. It's not like the kids are like, man, John Carpenter's The Thing. That sure was good. Can't believe it bombed. One day people will get it.
Guess you guys aren't ready for that yet.
That would just be going way too far. It doesn't do stuff like that. The kids are likable. I think it's fun, but the serial killer plot, it's legit. It gets intense. And I don't want to spoil who the actor is who plays the serial killer, because this movie very much is a mystery. Are they right in their suspicions? Are they not? But that actor is very good, and the ending of this movie is what really took this up a notch, because I was watching it thinking, yeah, this is fun, this is a good time, and then the ending hits, and I was like, this is bold, this is interesting, I love this, and the final note the movie ends on, like, it really just took it from a fun little nostalgia riff to something legit, something really good, so I definitely recommend Summer of '84.
Here, kitty, kitty, kitty. and mouse. Copycat.
Copycat from 1995 is about a police detective and an agoraphobic serial killer expert who team up to try to track down a killer who is copycatting the most famous serial killers throughout history. So recently I put a post on my Patreon page to all of the awesome people there. Thank you so much to all of my patrons, saying that I've been really getting into thrillers lately and asking for some recommendations. And I think the one that came up the most was Copycat. So many people telling me what a great movie this was. I don't think I'd ever heard of it, but it's starring Holly Hunter and Sigourney Weaver as the main duo. They are so fantastic in this. Like Sigourney Weaver, her typical fantastic self. But I really loved Holly Hunter in this. She's like this really fun, kind of happy-go-lucky police detective who's just really good at her job because she's just so smart. And I thought she was so likable, so fun. But the supporting cast here is so deep. I mean, you've got Dermot Mulroney, Will Patton, and Harry Connick Jr. as a psychopath. Not the main psychopath, so that's not a spoiler. But I actually love Harry Connick Jr. for his music. So seeing him in this kind of role is just crazy. And I like the actor who played the serial killer. I'm not going to spoil who he is, but he was understated in a way that I really like. Sometimes I feel like I have an allergy to actors going so over the top in psychopath performances. I think getting a new version of the Joker every couple of years for a while kind of burned that out of me. And that's what Harry Connick Jr. is doing in this, but he's not in it a whole lot. The actual killer, understated and very effective. The actual serial killer content is disturbing enough, but never goes too dark in a way that you can't have fun with the movie anymore. I wouldn't say this movie is as dark as Seven or something like that. It's definitely more easy breezy watchable. This is just an old school, well-made, slick 90s thriller. I could watch a dozen of these movies in a day and be happy. The Spiral Staircase from 1946 takes place on a dark and stormy night in a giant mansion where a mute servant girl believes that she is being stalked by a serial killer at large who is killing off women with disabilities. Yeah, you heard that right. A movie from the 1940s has a premise that brutally dark. It is about a killer who is killing women with some kind of handicap. It's really sick and disturbing, but the movie is just like that old school, old Hollywood black and white feel that I love so much. So well made and well shot. The cast is fantastic. The lead is played by Dorothy McGuire, who people might know from a lot of 60s live action Disney movies. She was the mom in Swiss Family Robinson. Love Swiss Family Robinson, by the way. But here she is so young and beautiful and charismatic, giving a wordless performance just with facial expressions and physicality, and doing an incredible job making her so likable, relatable, sympathetic. And I think this movie should not be overlooked for its influence on the later to come slasher genre, but perhaps even more importantly, on the giallo genre. It feels a lot like a giallo, with sometimes you get POV kills, you get close-ups on the killer's eyes, feels very Argento-like. Of course, the movie's never going to be that graphic. It is from the 1940s, but the atmosphere is 10 out of 10. You have got a dark and stormy night in an old dark house. How can you get better than that? Last time I saw this was actually on film at a movie marathon that I went to. It was so great. The crowd loved it. Got a lot of good laughs out of Elsa Lanchester in a supporting role. She's really funny in this. Great movie.
I'm really looking forward to our time here together.
A Wounded Fawn from 2022 kicks off with two people who work for art collectors whose job is to buy expensive pieces, and one of them shows up at the house of the other and offers a very large offer for a certain piece that she just bought. He's allowed into the house, and there he kills her. And it turns out he is a serial killer. And we kick off a bit in the future where a museum curator is just starting to date this guy and goes to his secluded cabin for the weekend. So this is a recent straight to Shudder independent horror film directed by Travis Stevens, who made Jacob's Wife from a few years ago. I actually think this is a big step up for that. And for a long time, this was my top pick of my favorite Shudder movie that was not on physical media that I wanted. And it got released by the Vinegar Syndrome Shudder partner label. And it looks so good on Blu-ray, man. I couldn't even tell this was shot on film when I watched it on Shudder, but watching it on Blu-ray, I'm like, this has got to be on film. And I looked it up and it was shot on 16 millimeter. It's a beautiful, beautiful film. But it is such an intense movie for like the first act or so, where this woman is at this cabin with this killer. The killer is actually played by Josh Rubin, the director of movies like Werewolves Within and the upcoming Heart Eyes. He's really good in this, charming when he needs to be, but also creepy. And the movie makes this really interesting decision where the woman is recovering from an abusive relationship she was in the past. So you feel her being tense, but you also understand why she's trying to blow off those feelings, because she figures that's just from past trauma and not because she's with the serial killer, which she is. But the movie, after about the first act or so, takes an interesting turn into being something very different and something really weird. This movie is like if you mix together Psycho, The Wicker Man, and Evil Dead. You put all those in a blender and you kind of get a Wounded Fawn. And the director was actually heavily influenced by art, and he took a lot of the various designs in this movie from actual art pieces, also from a weird international poster for Alien, but that's another story for another time. And there's so many beautiful, bizarre looking images in this film. So if you're in the mood for a typical serial killer thriller that takes a bizarre turn into Weirdoville, check out A Wounded Fawn.
I don't want you to touch my mother. So go away, I'm warning you. Go away or I'll kill you myself.
Shadow of a Doubt from 1943 is about a suburban teenage girl whose adult brother comes home to visit, and she's ecstatic because she idolizes her brother, but then begins to suspect that he may be a serial killer that is currently at large. A classic Alfred Hitchcock film, and one of my favorites from him. Actually, it was Hitchcock's favorite of his movies, and it's starring Joseph Cotten as this serial killer. That's not a spoiler. The movie's not a mystery. We know that he is the killer from the start. He is so good and incredibly creepy. In fact, I think the most unbelievable thing about this movie is that his family doesn't immediately know that he is a killer, because he is such a creep, but they all like him, I guess because he's handsome, he's successful, he's family, but like, this is one creepy dude. It's crazy. Teresa Wright plays this little sister. She is very likable. The movie really well puts us into her shoes as she's starting to find clues, unravel what's going on, and holy cow, the movie gets really intense, which is something that Alfred Hitchcock is a master of. It goes to some very dark places, and we want Teresa Wright to survive, but as he's figured out more and more what she knows and becomes more explicitly the monster that she suspects, it's all about horror coming into suburbia at a time when movies weren't really doing that so much. This was pre-John Carpenter's Halloween, and here's a very early example of a similar kind of movie, and it's really good.
You're a very bad girl. The Stepfather.
Speaking of horror coming into suburbia, The Stepfather from 1987, which is about a serial killer who just wants the typical American dream. He wants to have a wife, a family, a white picket fence, but every time his family does not turn out to be exactly what he wants, he kills them all and starts over as somebody else's stepfather. Terry O'Quinn as the serial killing stepfather gives one of my favorite performances as a serial killer in cinematic history. I just said that I don't like when these actors go too far over the top into Looneyville. And Terry O'Quinn really does not do that. He is fantastic. He is very subtle, very nice and charming, but always in this very fake way. Like, you can totally understand people getting fooled by him, but he just feels artificial. And that seems like a really hard thing for an actor to do to me. Like, to be... Obviously, an actor's always being fake when they're on screen, pretty much, but to also be sufficiently believable and fake at the same time. I just think Terry Quinn is just amazing in this. The movie is very violent. It's got that 80s gore that you're looking for, even in a very shocking opening scene. And I love the atmosphere, the vibe of this. It's 80s suburbia in the fall, leaves everywhere. A beautiful movie, one of my favorite 80s horror films for sure.
Figured I was gone, huh?
Run. Hide in the staircase. Run quick.
The Night of the Hunter.
The Night of the Hunter from 1955, which stars Robert Mitchum as a serial killing preacher who, after rooming with an executed man in prison, then goes to hunt down that man's wife and kids in hopes of finding some money that husband stashed there. So The Night of the Hunter is one of the great classics of the black and white era. It is directed by Charles Laughton, the only film he ever directed, and it is an absolute masterpiece. Another one of my favorite performances ever as a serial killer with Robert Mitchum, who is posing as this very southern and folksy preacher, and some people buy into it, but he is so obviously a phony in just the best way. An absolute monster hunting down this money, going after children at certain points. And it's the kind of movie that I think, you know, especially in its time, would be considered a noir film, but I think because it's from the perspective of kids, it kind of goes into this horror level where Robert Mitchum feels like a movie monster, and the movie almost feels like some kind of fairy tale fantasy about kids trying to escape a hideous creature. It's so good. It is unbelievably well shot. Charles Lawton took a lot of influence from the silent era to make this, so it's just gorgeous. There's this one shot of a dead body underwater that will haunt your nightmares. It is one of the most striking images you're going to see like in any movie, but certainly in a black and white film of its era. Absolutely love Night of the Hunter. Robert Mitchum is so crazy. It's an example of a crazy over-the-top serial killer performance that 100% works for me.
22 years later, Norman Bates is home. Psycho 2.
Psycho 2 from 1983. About 20 years after the events of the first film, Norman Bates is finally declared sane and released from the mental institution to go back home. But after coming back to his hometown and the Bates Motel, we have to find out, is he truly cured? So undoubtedly, the more obvious film to put on this list is the original Hitchcock Psycho. It's a classic. It's amazing. But I talked about it a lot on this channel, and I wanted to talk about Psycho 2, a film that sometimes I think I might like better than the original. Now, I think the original Psycho is better as a more intense horror thriller experience, but Psycho 2 is just so much more emotional, and I get so into the main character. Anthony Perkins as Norman Bates, one of the greatest serial killers in cinematic history. He's great in the first film, but he's better in this one, and he's the main character, and he's as much the one trying to figure out who is the killer, unraveling the mystery, as he is the main suspect, because he is certainly not mentally stable. He doesn't even know if Mother is coming back to kill people or not, and that is the crux of the mystery. It is gripping, interesting. The whole cast is incredible, but especially Anthony Perkins, and it's one of my favorite horror sequels of all time. Against all odds, it's an example of coming back to a franchise decades after the original and doing everything right. Directed by Richard Franklin very well, but written by Tom Holland, my boy Tom Holland, director of Fright Night. Psycho 2 is awesome.
The terror starts the moment you stop for The Hitcher.
The Hitcher from 1986, which follows a young man who picks up a hitchhiker on a rainy night and discovers that man is a psychopathic serial killer. After he kicks him out of the car, the Hitcher then pursues him, killing more and more people along his path. So The Hitcher is my pick for the most intense horror film of the 1980s. I think this is a brutally intense experience with one of the greatest horror movie villains of all time, with Rutger Hauer as the Hitcher. One of the most effective serial killers probably in cinematic history. I mean, he just slaughters so many people. It is insane. This movie keeps a lot of the gore off screen, but always makes it really effective. Has one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen in a horror movie towards the end of it. I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. Love seeing Thomas Howell as the lead. Love the atmosphere of Texas, where it takes place on these dusty roads. It almost feels like a post-apocalyptic wasteland with this absolute monster pursuing him. I love this movie, and if you want to hear me talk more in depth about The Hitcher, you can click this video right over here. I did a full breakdown of The Hitcher just recently. It's my last video, so you can go check that out, or check out this playlist for more of my recommendation list videos. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Hit the like and subscribe buttons if you haven't yet. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.